At brunch, my daughter-in-law whispered, "Smile while you can. This is your last year in our lives. You won't be in the photos. You won't even be in the memories." I didn't flinch. That night, the house was mine. Her key didn't work. No one asked where she went. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it really started. 3 months before that satisfying moment when Amanda's key turned uselessly in the lock she thought controlled my life. The brunch happened on a Sunday in early October. David had invited me to their usual weekend gathering, something that had become routine since I'd been living with them for the past year. Amanda always made such a show of these brunches, with her expensive china and perfectly arranged fruit platters, as if she were hosting some sort of society event rather than feeding family. I arrived at 10:30, as requested, carrying the homemade apple butter I'd prepared the night before. David hugged me warmly at the door, but I noticed Amanda barely looked up from her phone as she mumbled a greeting. Their 8-year-old son Marcus ran to me with genuine excitement.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
Wrapping his small arms around my waist. "Grandma Eleanor, did you bring the apple butter?" he asked, his eyes bright with anticipation. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, ruffling his dark hair that reminded me so much of David at that age. Amanda finally glanced over, her expression tightening slightly. "Marcus, remember what we talked about? Grandma Eleanor might not be feeling well enough to cook much longer." The comment hit me like a cold slap, but I kept my expression neutral. This wasn't the first time Amanda had made such remarks, always delivered with a sweet smile that never reached her eyes. Over the past few months, she'd been dropping hints about my supposed declining health, my forgetfulness, my inability to manage simple tasks. We settled around their dining room table, the one I'd helped them pick out when they first moved into this house. The house that Amanda believed belonged to her and David. The house she had no idea I'd actually purchased for them 3 years ago, keeping the deed in my name for reasons that now seemed prophetic. "Eleanor, you look tired," Amanda said, as she served the eggs Benedict she'd ordered from the upscale restaurant downtown. "Are you sleeping well? Sometimes at our age, the mind doesn't rest properly." Our age. Amanda was 34, I was 69, but the way she said it, you'd think we were contemporaries sharing the same struggles with aging. "I sleep just fine, thank you," I replied, taking a bite of my eggs. They were perfectly prepared, of course. Amanda never settled for anything less than perfection, at least on the surface. David, oblivious as always to the undercurrents between his wife and mother, launched into a story about his latest project at the architectural firm. He was excited about designing a new community center, his voice animated as he described his vision. I listened, genuinely interested, proud of the man my son had become despite everything. "That sounds wonderful, honey," Amanda said, though I noticed she was scrolling through her phone while he spoke. "Oh, speaking of community centers, I saw Mrs. Patterson at the grocery store yesterday. She mentioned that wonderful assisted living facility opened up on Elm Street, the one with the full-service dining and activities programs," David's story faltered. "Assisted living? Why would you bring that up?" Amanda set down her phone and reached across to pat David's hand. "I just think it's good to know what options are available. For the future, when people need more specialized care." Her eyes flickered to me briefly, and I felt that familiar chill. Amanda had been planting these seeds for months, preparing David for the idea that I was becoming a burden, that I needed professional care. The truth was, at 69, I was probably in better health than she was. I walked 3 miles every morning, managed my own finances, cooked, cleaned, and had a sharper memory than most people half my age. But Amanda was patient and strategic. She never made direct accusations. Instead, she'd mention how I'd supposedly forgotten to turn off the stove, or how I'd seemed confused about something simple, or how I'd repeated myself during a conversation. None of it was true, but David wasn't home during the day to witness these alleged incidents. After brunch, Amanda insisted on walking me to my car. David had gone inside to help Marcus with a school project, leaving us alone on the front porch. The October air was crisp, and the maple trees lining the street were just beginning to turn their brilliant autumn colors. "Eleanor," Amanda said, her voice taking on that artificially sweet tone I'd come to recognize as a warning sign. I think we need to have an honest conversation. I turned to face her, noting how she positioned herself slightly above me on the porch steps. A subtle but deliberate power play. About what, dear? She smiled, but it was the kind of smile a cat might give a mouse before pouncing. About your future. About what's best for everyone involved. I'm listening. Amanda glanced around, making sure we were truly alone, then leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a whisper, but every word was crystal clear. Smile while you can. This is your last year in our lives. You won't be in the photos. You won't even be in the memories. The words hung in the air between us like a poison cloud. Amanda straightened up, her mask of sweet concern sliding back into place as smoothly as if she'd never dropped it. I just want you to understand the reality of the situation, she continued in a normal voice, loud enough for any neighbor who might be listening. David loves you, of course, but he's starting to see that you need more care than we can provide at home. It's not fair to Marcus to have him worry about Grandma's condition. Children shouldn't have to deal with that kind of stress. My condition, as if I were suffering from some debilitating illness rather than simply being 69 years old and inconvenient to her plans. Have a lovely rest of your Sunday, Amanda said, her voice bright and cheerful. Drive carefully. You know how confusing traffic can be. I got into my car without saying a word, my hands steady on the steering wheel despite the fury building inside me. As I drove the 15 minutes back to my small apartment across town, Amanda's words echoed in my mind. Not just the threat itself, but the casual cruelty of it, the confidence in her voice that told me she'd already planned every detail of my removal from David's life. What Amanda didn't know, what she couldn't possibly have imagined, was that I'd been watching her just as carefully as she'd been positioning against me. I'd seen the credit card bills she hid from David, noticed the expensive purchases that appeared in their home, observed how she managed to redirect every conversation about finances away from specifics. More importantly, Amanda had no idea about the folder of documents I kept in my bedroom safe. Documents that proved I owned the house she considered her domain. Documents that showed I'd been quietly paying the property taxes and insurance for 3 years. Documents that could change everything with a single phone call. That night, I sat in my small kitchen with a cup of tea and a legal pad, writing down every detail of our conversation, every threat, every manipulation I'd witnessed over the past months. Amanda thought she was playing chess while I played checkers. She was about to learn how wrong she was. Tomorrow, I would make some phone calls. I would visit my lawyer. I would begin the process of reclaiming not just my home, but my place in my son's life. Amanda wanted to erase me from their family? We'd see about that. The next morning, I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. Amanda's whispered threat had done something unexpected. It had lifted a fog I didn't even realize had been clouding my judgment. For too long, I'd been trying to be the accommodating mother-in-law, bending over backward to avoid conflict, accepting small slights and subtle dismissals because I thought that's what family harmony required. No more. I made my coffee and sat at my small kitchen table with the folder I'd retrieved from my bedroom safe. Inside were documents that told a very different story than the one Amanda believed. The deed to 847 Maple Street, the house where David, Amanda, and Marcus lived, was in my name. Eleanor Morrison, sole owner. 3 years ago, when David and Amanda were newlyweds struggling to afford anything decent in their desired neighborhood, I'd made what I thought was a generous gesture. Instead of simply giving them money for a down payment, I'd purchased the house myself and allowed them to live there rent-free. My plan had been to transfer ownership to David gradually, but I'd wanted to see how responsible they were with the property first. I'd told David the house was essentially his, and in his excitement, he'd assumed I meant legally. I'd never corrected that misunderstanding, though now I wondered if some part of me had sensed even then that Amanda couldn't be trusted. The property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs had all been paid directly from my accounts through automatic withdrawals. Amanda handled the household bills, utilities, internet, groceries, while remaining blissfully unaware that the roof over her head belonged to the woman she was trying to eliminate from their lives. I spread the documents across my table. The original purchase agreement, property tax statements, insurance policies, even receipts for the new roof I'd had installed last spring while they were on vacation. Amanda had taken credit for managing the roofing project, never knowing I'd coordinated and paid for everything. My phone rang, interrupting my review. David's name appeared on the screen. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, keeping my voice light. "Mom, I wanted to check on you after yesterday. Amanda mentioned you seemed a little overwhelmed during brunch." Overwhelmed. That was Amanda's interpretation of my silence after her threat. I wondered what other creative descriptions she'd shared with David about my supposed declining state. "I felt fine, honey. Just tired from all the cooking I'd done the night before." I let a small sigh escape. Though I have to admit, I've been thinking about some practical matters lately. Financial planning, that sort of thing. "Oh?" David's voice sharpened with interest. "Is everything okay? Do you need help with anything?" "Actually, I've been meaning to review some of my property investments with you. Nothing urgent, but I think it's time you understood the full scope of what I own, for estate planning purposes." There was a pause. David had always assumed I lived modestly on Social Security and a small pension from my years working at the library. He had no idea about the life insurance payout from his father's death, or the investments I'd made over the years, or the real estate I'd quietly accumulated. "Of course, Mom. We should definitely go over that stuff. How about I come by this weekend?" "That would be perfect. Oh, and David, bring the deed to your house. I want to make sure all my paperwork matches what you have." Another pause. Longer this time. "The deed? I'm not sure where Amanda keeps that stuff. Why do you need to see it?" "Just being thorough." "Dear, you know how important it is to have organized records." After we hung up, I called my lawyer, Martin Walsh, who'd been handling my affairs for over a decade. Martin was one of the few people who knew the true extent of my financial situation. When I explained what had been happening with Amanda, his response was immediate and satisfying. "Eleanor, you have more power in this situation than you realize. If she's been claiming mental incapacity on your part, and you have documentation of her statements, that could actually work in your favor." "How so?" "Because anyone attempting to manipulate or financially exploit an elderly person through false claims of incapacity is opening themselves up to serious legal consequences. The fact that she doesn't know you own the house makes this even more interesting." I spent the rest of the morning making phone calls and organizing my strategy. The property management company that handled my other rental properties confirmed they could have new locks installed within 24 hours. My accountant verified that all taxes and insurance were current, and in my name only. The security company that monitored my apartment could extend their services to the Maple Street property immediately. That afternoon, I drove past the house where my family lived. Amanda's car was in the driveway, but David's wasn't. He'd be at work for several more hours. Marcus would be at school until 3:30. The house looked perfect from the outside, just as Amanda always maintained it. She did have excellent taste, I had to admit. She'd painted the front door a sophisticated navy blue and planted seasonal flowers in the beds I'd originally designed. On impulse, I parked and walked to the front door. I still had my key, though I'd never used it without invitation. Today felt different. Today, I was visiting my own property. I let myself in quietly. The house smelled like the expensive candles Amanda favored, and everything was in its usual pristine condition. But as I moved through the rooms, I noticed things I'd missed during family visits. In the home office David had set up in what used to be my sewing room, I found a stack of real estate brochures, houses in different neighborhoods, all significantly more expensive than the current market value of 847 Maple Street. In the kitchen, tucked behind the coffee maker, I discovered a notepad with Amanda's handwriting. "Call Peterson Realty." Market analysis was written at the top, followed by staging consultation, and timeline for ease transition. My transition. Amanda was already planning my removal and the sale of my house. I photographed the notepad with my phone, then continued exploring. In the master bedroom, the room that had been mine and David's father's when we'd first looked at the house together, I found something that made my blood run cold. Hidden in Amanda's jewelry box, underneath her expensive necklaces, was a business card for Sunset Manor Assisted Living. On the back, in Amanda's neat handwriting, were notes: memory care unit, secured facility, Dr. Patterson referral for capacity evaluation, timeline 6 to 8 weeks. She wasn't just planning to push me out of their lives. She was planning to have me declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized. I photographed this evidence as well, my hands trembling slightly as the full scope of Amanda's plan became clear. She intended to have me declared mentally unfit, gain some form of guardianship or conservatorship, and then sell my own house to fund her family's move to a more expensive neighborhood. The front door opened suddenly, and I heard Amanda's voice calling out, "Marcus, you're home early." I quickly closed the jewelry box and moved toward the hallway, timing my appearance to look like I'd just emerged from the bathroom. "Oh!" Amanda stopped short when she saw me, her face cycling through surprise, confusion, and barely concealed anger. "Eleanor, what are you doing here?" "Hello, dear," I said calmly. "I was dropping off Marcus's birthday gift early." I held up a small wrapped package I'd grabbed from my purse. I used my key since no one answered the door. "I hope that's all right." Amanda's eyes narrowed. "You still have a key?" "Of course. David gave it to me years ago for emergencies." I smiled pleasantly. "Should I not have one?" "Well, I just think for security purposes, we should know who has access to our home." Our home. Standing in the house I owned, listening to the woman who was plotting to steal my life talk about security and access. "You're absolutely right," I agreed. "Security is very important. In fact, I've been thinking about having a security system installed. Motion sensors, cameras, that sort of thing. Just to make sure everyone stays safe." Amanda's face went pale. "Cameras?" "Oh, yes. These days you never know who might be coming and going. It's good to have a record of everything." I paused, letting the implications sink in. "Well, I should let you get on with your day. Tell Marcus his gift is on the kitchen counter." I walked toward the door, then turned back as if something had just occurred to me. "Oh, Amanda. I'm having David over this weekend to review some property documents. Nothing to worry about, just organizing my affairs. You understand how important it is to keep accurate records of who owns what." I left her standing in the foyer, her face frozen in that fake smile that no longer fooled me for a second. That evening, I called the locksmith. Tomorrow, Amanda would begin to learn that the game she thought she was playing had rules she'd never bothered to understand, and the house she'd taken for granted was about to become the foundation of her undoing. The locksmith arrived at 847 Maple Street at 8:30 Thursday morning, just as I'd planned. I'd spent the previous evening watching the house from my car, noting the family's routine. David left for work at 7:45. Amanda drove Marcus to school at 8:15, then usually went to her yoga class or ran errands until lunch. Perfect timing. "You're sure you're the owner, ma'am?" the locksmith asked, reviewing the paperwork I'd provided. "I have to ask because we get calls sometimes from people trying to get into properties that aren't theirs." "I appreciate your caution," I replied, showing him my driver's license and the property deed. "This is definitely my house." As he worked on changing the locks, I thought about the phone call I'd made to my neighbor, Mrs. Chen, the night before. Mrs. Chen lived across the street and had known me since before David and Amanda moved in. Her reaction to my questions had been enlightening. "Oh, Eleanor, I'm so glad you called," she'd said. "I've been worried about you. That nice daughter-in-law of yours mentioned you've been having some memory issues. She said David is very concerned." "Memory issues?" "Well, she didn't go into details, but she mentioned you'd been forgetting things, getting confused about where you are sometimes. She said it's been very stressful for the family, especially with little Marcus in the house." My hands had tightened on the phone. "When did Amanda tell you this?" "Oh, several times over the past few months. Just last week, she asked if I'd noticed you behaving strangely when you visit. She said David is looking into getting you professional help." After hanging up with Mrs. Chen, I'd called 2 other neighbors with similar results. Amanda had been systematically spreading the story of my supposed mental decline throughout our entire neighborhood. She'd painted herself as the long-suffering daughter-in-law, caring for a confused elderly woman while protecting her young son from the stress of witnessing his grandmother's deterioration. The locksmith finished installing the new deadbolt and handed me 3 sets of keys. "All done, Mrs. Morrison. The old keys won't work anymore." "Perfect. Thank you." After he left, I walked through the house again, this time with the confidence of an owner reclaiming her property. I went to David's home office and began a more thorough search of the papers Amanda had hidden behind the real estate brochures. What I found was worse than I'd imagined. Tucked in a manila folder marked legal documents were printed emails between Amanda and someone named Dr. Patricia Patterson. The correspondence painted a picture of a woman methodically building a case for my mental incompetence. Dr. Patterson, one email read, "Thank you for agreeing to evaluate Eleanor Morrison. As I mentioned in our phone conversation, she's been exhibiting increasing signs of confusion and memory loss. Just yesterday, she forgot she'd already eaten breakfast and tried to cook again, nearly burning down the kitchen. My husband is in denial about his mother's condition, but I'm genuinely concerned for everyone's safety, especially our 8-year-old son." None of it was true. I'd never forgotten a meal, never left anything burning on the stove, never shown any signs of confusion or memory loss. But Amanda had documented these fictional incidents in detail, creating a paper trail that would support her claims. Another email was even more damning. "I've spoken with several neighbors who've also noticed Eleanor's declining condition. They're willing to provide statements if necessary. I think we need to move quickly before she becomes a danger to herself or others." My neighbors, the same people who'd expressed concern for my memory issues when I called them. Amanda had not only lied to them about my condition, she'd convinced them they'd witnessed it themselves. The final email in the sequence was dated just 3 days ago. "Dr. Patterson, I'd like to schedule Eleanor's evaluation as soon as possible. My husband is finally starting to see that his mother needs professional care. I think next week would be ideal." I photographed every page, my anger building with each fabricated detail. Amanda hadn't just threatened to erase me from their lives. She'd been systematically destroying my reputation and credibility for months, preparing for a legal guardianship that would give her control over my finances and my future. My phone buzzed with a text message from Amanda. "Eleanor, David mentioned you wanted to see our house deed this weekend. I can't seem to find it anywhere. Do you happen to know where it might be?" I stared at the message for a long moment, then typed back, "I'm sure it will turn up. Important documents have a way of surfacing when you need them most." Her response came immediately. "Is everything okay? You sound strange." Strange, the word Amanda used to describe anything she couldn't control or understand. "Everything is fine, dear. I'll see you and David this weekend as planned." I spent the rest of the morning researching Dr. Patricia Patterson. What I found was disturbing but not surprising. Dr. Patterson specialized in geriatric psychiatry and had a reputation for quick diagnoses of mental incapacity in elderly patients. Several online reviews from family members suggested she was more interested in billable hours than thorough evaluations. More importantly, I discovered that Dr. Patterson had been sanctioned twice by the state medical board for inadequate documentation and questionable diagnostic practices. Amanda had chosen her expert carefully, someone who would provide the diagnosis she wanted without too many inconvenient questions. At lunch, I drove to the elementary school where Marcus attended 3rd grade. I'd volunteered in the library there for 2 years before Amanda had suggested I was too unreliable to continue. The principal, Mrs. Rodriguez, greeted me warmly when I stopped by her office. "Eleanor, how wonderful to see you. We've missed having you here." "I've missed being here," I replied honestly. "I was wondering if I could ask you about something. Has Amanda ever mentioned concerns about my health or mental state?" Mrs. Rodriguez's expression shifted slightly. "Well, she did mention that you'd been having some challenges lately. She said David was worried about you spending time around children because of your memory issues." "My memory issues?" "She said you'd become confused during your last volunteer shift, that you'd forgotten which books you'd already shelved and became agitated when the children tried to help you." I felt a cold fury settle in my stomach. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I've never become agitated with children in my life, and I certainly never forgot which books I was shelving." "Oh." Mrs. Rodriguez looked uncomfortable. "I assumed she was telling the truth. Why would she lie about something like that?" "That's an excellent question." I left the school with another piece of Amanda's puzzle. She hadn't just been spreading lies to neighbors and doctors. She'd been destroying my reputation in every place where I'd built relationships and credibility. The volunteer position I'd loved, the community connections I'd cherished, the simple respect I'd earned over years of service. Amanda had systematically poisoned all of it. That afternoon, I made one more crucial discovery. While reviewing the bank statements I'd retrieved from my file cabinet, I noticed a pattern of small electronic transfers I'd overlooked before. Every month for the past 6 months, exactly $100 had been transferred from my checking account to an account I didn't recognize. I called my bank immediately. Mrs. Morrison, those transfers were set up as automatic withdrawals for a medical alert service, the customer service representative explained. The authorization came through your daughter-in-law, Amanda Morrison. She said you'd requested the service but were having trouble remembering to make the payments yourself. Medical alert service. I'd never signed up for any such thing, never authorized Amanda to make financial arrangements on my behalf. But somehow she'd convinced the bank that I was mentally impaired and needed her assistance managing my affairs. I want those transfers stopped immediately, I said, and I want a full investigation into how this authorization was processed without my direct consent. Of course, ma'am. I'll start that paperwork right away. Would you like to file a complaint about unauthorized access to your account? Yes, I said, my voice steady despite the rage building inside me. I would. As I hung up the phone, I realized Amanda's plan was more sophisticated than I'd initially understood. She wasn't just spreading rumors about my mental decline. She was creating a financial paper trail that suggested I was already incapable of managing my own affairs. The medical alert service authorization would be Exhibit A in any competency hearing. But Amanda had made one crucial mistake. In her eagerness to control every aspect of the narrative, she'd left evidence everywhere. Every lie she'd told, every manipulation she'd orchestrated, every step she'd taken to isolate and discredit me, it was all documented, traceable, provable. I spent the evening organizing everything I'd discovered into a comprehensive file. Photos of her handwritten notes about my transition, screenshots of the emails with Dr. Patterson, documentation of the unauthorized bank transfers, statements from neighbors revealing the lies Amanda had told them. Tomorrow was Friday. On Saturday, David would come to my apartment expecting to review my financial documents. Instead, he was going to learn exactly who his wife really was. And on Sunday, Amanda would discover that the house she'd been so confident was hers had new locks, and her key no longer worked. The woman who'd whispered that this would be my last year in their lives was about to learn that some people are much more dangerous when you underestimate them. David arrived at my apartment Saturday morning carrying a manila folder and wearing the expression of someone who'd rather be anywhere else. I'd seen that look before. It was the same face he'd made as a teenager when he had to confess to breaking curfew or getting a poor grade on a test he'd forgotten to study for. "Coffee?" I offered, gesturing toward the pot I'd prepared. "Thanks, Mom." He settled into my small kitchen table, the same one where I'd done homework with him 20 years ago. "So, Amanda said you wanted to go over some financial stuff?" I did. I poured 2 cups and sat across from him, noting how he avoided eye contact. "But first, I'm curious about something. How long has Amanda been managing your household finances?" David looked surprised by the question. "Pretty much since we got married. She's good with numbers and I hate dealing with bills and paperwork." "Why?" "Just wondering. It's smart to have one person handle those responsibilities." I sipped my coffee. "Did you bring the deed to your house like I asked?" His face reddened slightly. "About that. Amanda looked everywhere, but she can't find it. She thinks it might be in our safety deposit box, but she's not sure which bank. We've moved it a couple times over the years." "I see." I kept my voice neutral. "Well, that's all right. I actually have a copy here." I pulled out the folder I'd prepared and handed him the property deed. David scanned it quickly, then looked up with confusion. "Mom, this has your name on it." "That's right. But I thought, when we moved in, you said the house was essentially mine." "Essentially, yes, but not legally. Not yet." The color drained from David's face as he read the document more carefully. "You mean you own our house? Like, completely own it?" "I purchased it 3 years ago so you and Amanda could have a nice place to raise Marcus. I've been paying all the property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs since then." I pulled out a stack of bank statements. "These show every payment I've made." David stared at the papers, his mouth slightly open. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I wanted to see how you'd handle the responsibility. And honestly, I thought I'd transfer ownership to you gradually. But recent circumstances have made me reconsider." Recent circumstances? This was the moment I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I opened my laptop and showed David the photos I'd taken of Amanda's notes and emails. "David, I need you to look at these very carefully." He leaned forward, squinting at the screen. I watched his expression change as he read Amanda's correspondence with Dr. Patterson, her plans for my transition, her notes about the staged mental health evaluation. "I don't understand," he said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "What is this?" "These are emails between your wife and a psychiatrist she hired to declare me mentally incompetent. She's been planning to have me institutionalized so she can gain control of my finances and sell my house." David's face went white. "That's impossible. Amanda would never—" "Look at the dates, David. Look at the details she provided about my supposed memory problems, my alleged confusion, my fictitious dangerous behavior around Marcus." He scrolled through the emails again, more slowly this time. I could see the exact moment when the full scope of Amanda's deception hit him. His hands started shaking. "She told Dr. Patterson that you nearly burned down the kitchen," he said, reading aloud. "She said you forgot you'd already eaten breakfast and tried to cook again. Has that ever happened?" "No, never." His voice was hollow. "But she told me you'd been having episodes when I wasn't home. She said you were getting confused about basic things, that she was worried about leaving Marcus alone with you. And you believed her." David set the laptop down and buried his face in his hands. "She's been saying it for months. Little things at first, that you'd repeated yourself during conversations, that you'd forgotten where you put things. Then it got worse. She said you'd gotten lost coming back from the grocery store last week. I've never gotten lost going anywhere. She said you'd called her crying, asking her to come pick you up because you couldn't remember how to get home." The image of Amanda manufacturing that phone call, probably while I was safely in my apartment making dinner, filled me with cold rage. She'd been creating an entire fictional narrative of my decline, feeding David carefully crafted lies designed to make him question his own mother's mental capacity. "David," I said gently, "when was the last time you and I spent time alone together? Just the two of us, without Amanda present?" He thought for a moment, his frown deepening. I can't remember. She always wants to come along when I visit you. She says it's because she's worried about your condition. And how do I seem to you right now? Confused? Forgetful? Mentally impaired?" "You seem exactly like you always have." His voice cracked. "Mom, what has she done?" I showed him the bank statements proving the unauthorized medical alert service charges, the printed emails from neighbors explaining how Amanda had convinced them I was mentally declining, the business card for Sunset Manor with Amanda's handwritten notes about secured facilities and capacity evaluations. With each piece of evidence, David seemed to physically shrink. The confident man who'd walked into my apartment was being replaced by someone smaller, devastated by the realization that his wife had been systematically lying to him for months. "There's more," I said, pulling out the final folder. "She's been telling people all over town that you're planning to put me in a nursing home because I've become dangerous. Your son's school principal believes I'm mentally unstable. Our neighbors think I'm suffering from dementia. The bank authorized her to make financial decisions on my behalf because she convinced them I was incompetent." David looked up at me with tears in his eyes. "Why would she do this?" I showed him the real estate brochures I'd found in his office, the notes about market analysis and staging consultations. "She wants to sell my house and move your family to Oakwood Hills. The house she's been planning to sell is worth enough to buy one of these properties with cash left over. But she knows you live with us. Where did she think you'd go?" "Sunset Manor, a secured memory care facility where confused elderly people can't wander away or cause problems for their families." The full scope of Amanda's plan was finally clear to David. She'd intended to have me declared mentally incompetent, gain legal guardianship, sell my house to fund their move to a more expensive neighborhood, and warehouse me in an institution where I'd be out of sight and out of mind. "I have to confront her," David said, standing up abruptly. "I have to ask her about this." "Sit down," I said firmly. "You're not confronting anyone until we've thought this through. But Mom, she's been lying to me for months. She's been trying to have you locked up in a nursing home. She's been stealing from your bank account. All of which is why we need to be strategic about how we handle this. I refilled his coffee cup, giving him a moment to process everything. David, what do you think Amanda will say when you show her these documents? He considered the question. She'll deny it. She'll say someone forged the emails, or that she was just exploring options for your care, or that I'm misunderstanding something. Exactly. And then what will she do? He paused, thinking. She'll probably try to have me doubt what I'm seeing. She'll make me feel guilty for not trusting her. She'll say she was only trying to protect our family. And if that doesn't work? David's expression hardened as understanding dawned. She'll escalate. If she's desperate enough to forge medical evaluations and steal from your bank account, she'll do whatever it takes to get what she wants. I nodded. Which is why we're going to let her make the next move, but we're going to be ready for it. I explained my plan. David would return home and act as if our conversation had been purely financial, reviewing investments, organizing paperwork for estate planning purposes. He wouldn't confront Amanda about the lies or the emails. Instead, he'd quietly begin documenting her behavior, paying attention to the manipulations he'd been blind to before. What about the house? He asked. She's going to notice eventually that something's changed. Let me worry about that. Your job is to protect Marcus and gather evidence. Can you do that? David nodded, though he still looked shaken. What kind of evidence? Record conversations if you can do it legally. Document every lie she tells about me. Pay attention to how she responds when things don't go her way. I handed him a small notebook. Write down everything, with dates and times. We're going to need a clear picture of who she really is. As David prepared to leave, he turned back to me with a question that broke my heart. Mom, how long have you known about what she was doing? I suspected something was wrong for months, but I didn't understand the scope of it until this week. I kept telling myself I was being paranoid, that I was imagining the hostility. I should have seen it. I should have protected you. You couldn't see it because you trusted her. That's not a character flaw, David. That's what people do in healthy relationships. After he left, I sat in my quiet apartment, thinking about what would happen next. Amanda would sense that something had shifted. She was too intelligent and too manipulative not to notice changes in David's behavior. When she realized her control was slipping, she'd become dangerous. But I was ready for her. Every move she'd made against me had been documented and preserved. Every lie she'd told had been exposed. Every manipulation she'd orchestrated had been reversed. Tomorrow was Sunday. Tomorrow, Amanda would discover that her key no longer worked in the door of the house she'd taken for granted. Tomorrow, the woman who'd whispered threats about erasing me from their lives would learn that some people fight back. And when she did, I'd be waiting. Sunday morning arrived gray and drizzling, the kind of weather that seems to mirror internal tension. I'd been awake since 5, sitting in my kitchen with coffee and the morning newspaper, though I couldn't concentrate on reading. Today was the day Amanda would discover that her key no longer worked. My phone rang at 8:15, David's name on the screen. Mom. His voice was tight with barely controlled emotion. Amanda's acting strange this morning. She keeps asking questions about our conversation yesterday. She wants to know exactly what documents you showed me. What did you tell her? That we reviewed your investment portfolio and discussed estate planning. Nothing specific. He paused. But she's not buying it. She keeps pushing for details. How is she acting strange? She's been on her phone constantly since she woke up, making calls, sending texts, and she keeps walking through the house like she's looking for something. Or checking to make sure everything was still as she'd left it. David, I want you to take Marcus somewhere fun today. The zoo, a movie, anywhere that gets you both out of the house for several hours. Why? What's going to happen? I'm going to pay Amanda a visit, and I think it's better if you and Marcus aren't there when I do. There was a long pause. Mom, maybe I should stay. Maybe we should handle this together. No, this conversation needs to happen between Amanda and me first. Trust me on this. After hanging up, I dressed carefully in my best navy suit, the one I'd worn to business meetings back when I was still working. If Amanda wanted to play power games, I'd make sure she understood exactly who held the real power in this situation. I drove to Maple Street at 10:30, timing my arrival for after David and Marcus had left. Amanda's car was in the driveway, and I could see her silhouette moving around inside the house, my house. I walked up to the front door and tried my old key first, just to confirm what I already knew. It turned uselessly in the lock. Then I used one of the new keys the locksmith had provided. The door opened smoothly. "Hello, Amanda," I called out as I stepped inside. The sound of her footsteps stopped abruptly. She appeared in the hallway, her face cycling through confusion, surprise, and mounting anger. "Eleanor, how did you get in?" The door was locked. "I used my key," I said simply, closing the door behind me. "Your key doesn't work. I tried it yesterday when I thought I'd locked myself out." Her voice was sharp with suspicion. "This key works just fine." I held up the new key, letting her see it clearly. Of course, I had to have new locks installed, so the old keys don't work anymore. Amanda went very still. "You changed the locks? You can't do that. This is our house." "Actually, it's my house. I own it. I've always owned it." I walked past her into the living room, noting how she instinctively stepped back. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about a few things. David knows about this? About you changing the locks without telling us? David knows everything he needs to know." I settled into the armchair that had been my husband's favorite, the one Amanda had tried to convince David to get rid of months ago. "He knows I own this house. He knows I've been paying all the expenses. And he knows about your emails with Dr. Patterson." Amanda's face went white. For a moment, she looked like she might faint. Then her mask slipped back into place, though it wasn't quite as perfect as usual. "I don't know what you're talking about. Dr. Patricia Patterson, geriatric psychiatrist, the woman you hired to declare me mentally incompetent so you could gain guardianship and sell my house." I opened my purse and pulled out printed copies of the email correspondence. "Would you like me to read them aloud, or would you prefer to explain yourself first?" Amanda's breathing became shallow and rapid. She sank onto the couch across from me, her hands gripping the cushions. "You went through my private emails. I went through papers in my own house, papers that documented a criminal conspiracy to defraud an elderly person." I kept my voice calm and level. "Papers that prove you've been lying to my son for months about my mental health. David was worried about you. I was trying to help. By forging incidents of confusion and memory loss, by telling neighbors I was mentally declining, by convincing a doctor to evaluate me based on fabricated evidence." Amanda's composure cracked further. "You don't understand the stress I've been under, trying to manage a household, raise a child, deal with a difficult mother-in-law who interferes with everything." "Difficult, interferes." I repeated the word slowly. "Is that how you describe someone who bought you a house and pays all the expenses while asking for nothing in return? You didn't buy us anything. David inherited this house from his father." The lie was so brazen, so completely detached from reality, that for a moment I was genuinely speechless. Then I understood. Amanda had been telling this story for so long that she'd started believing it herself. "Amanda? David's father died when David was 12. He left a small life insurance policy that helped pay for David's college education. He never owned this house or any other property. That's not true." I pulled out the purchase documents and set them on the coffee table between us. "This is the deed showing my purchase of this property 3 years ago. These are the bank records showing every payment I've made for taxes, insurance, and maintenance. David knows all of this now." Amanda grabbed the papers and scanned them frantically, looking for some flaw in the documentation. When she found none, she threw them back on the table. "Fine, so you own the house. That doesn't change anything. David and I have been living here for 3 years. We have tenant rights. Tenants pay rent. Tenants have lease agreements. Tenants don't try to have their landlords declared mentally incompetent so they can steal their property." Amanda stood up abruptly and began pacing. "You're twisting everything. I was trying to help David see that you need professional care. You're almost 70 years old, living alone, obviously declining." "Obviously declining? Based on what evidence?" "You forget things. You repeat yourself. You get confused about simple tasks. Give me one specific example, Amanda faltered, realizing she was being asked to prove something that had never actually happened. You called me last week because you were lost and couldn't find your way home from the grocery store. I've never called you for help with anything. Check your phone records. You left the stove on and nearly burned down the kitchen. When? What day? What time? Were there witnesses? Amanda's pacing became more frantic. David sees it too. He's worried about you. David was worried because you've been lying to him for months. You told him I was having episodes when he wasn't home. You told him I was becoming dangerous around Marcus. You convinced him that his own mother was mentally ill based on stories you fabricated. I was protecting my family. From what? From the woman who bought you a house? From the grandmother who loves her grandson? From the mother-in-law who never interfered with your marriage or your decisions? Amanda spun around to face me, and for the first time, her mask came off completely. The sweet, concerned daughter-in-law disappeared, replaced by someone cold and calculating. From a bitter old woman who can't accept that her son has moved on. From someone who thinks she can control our lives just because she has money. From a manipulative narcissist who uses financial gifts to buy affection and loyalty. There it was, the real Amanda, finally exposed. I see, I said quietly. So my purchasing a house for my son's family was manipulation. My paying all the expenses without asking for anything in return was controlling. My loving my grandson and wanting to be part of his life was narcissistic. You never gave us anything without strings attached. Every gift, every favor, every dollar came with the expectation that we'd be grateful and deferential and include you in everything. What strings, Amanda? What did I ever ask for in return? You expected to be consulted about everything. You expected David to choose you over me when we disagreed about things. You expected to have a say in how we raised Marcus. I thought back over 3 years of interactions, trying to remember any instance where I'd demanded consultation or tried to interfere with their parenting. I couldn't recall a single example. When did I ever interfere with your parenting decisions? You undermined my authority with Marcus constantly, letting him have extra dessert when I said no. Buying him toys I'd specifically said he couldn't have. Teaching him to question my rules. I gave him extra dessert twice, on his birthday and Christmas. I bought him one toy, a book about dinosaurs, because he was interested in paleontology, and I never taught him to question your rules. You poisoned him against me. He'd rather spend time with you than with his own mother. The accusation was so absurd that I almost laughed. Marcus was a loving, well-adjusted child who adored both his parents and enjoyed spending time with his grandmother. The idea that an 8-year-old preferring dinosaur books and extra dessert represented some form of poisoning was beyond irrational. Amanda, do you hear yourself? You're describing normal grandparent-grandchild interactions as if they were acts of war, because they were. Every time you bought him something, every time you spoiled him, every time you made him smile when I'd had to discipline him, you were undermining my authority as his mother. I stared at this woman who'd been living in my house, spending my money, benefiting from my generosity, while harboring such intense resentment toward me. The scope of her delusion was breathtaking. So your solution was to have me declared mentally incompetent and institutionalized. My solution was to get David to see that you were becoming a problem for our family, that you needed professional care that we couldn't provide. And if I happened to be diagnosed as mentally incapable of managing my own affairs, and you happened to gain control of my finances, and you happened to be able to sell my house to buy a bigger one in a better neighborhood, well, that would just be a convenient side effect. Amanda's face flushed red. You don't know what you're talking about. I know about the real estate brochures in David's office. I know about your notes planning my transition. I know about the unauthorized bank withdrawals. I know about Sunset Manor and your plans for secured memory care facilities. With each revelation, Amanda seemed to physically shrink, but instead of shame or remorse, I saw something else in her eyes. Calculation. She was still looking for a way out, still trying to find an angle that would let her maintain control. David will never believe you, she said finally. He loves me. He trusts me. Whatever lies you've told him, I can fix. Can you fix the email correspondence with Dr. Patterson? Can you fix the bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals? Can you fix the statements from neighbors about the lies you told them regarding my mental health? Amanda went very still. What neighbors? Mrs. Chen, the Hendersons, the family at the end of the block, all the people you convinced that I was mentally declining, that David was worried about my condition, that you were the long-suffering daughter-in-law dealing with a confused elderly woman. They won't remember exactly what I said. They don't need to remember. I recorded my conversations with them. Just like David recorded his conversation with you this morning when you asked him what documents I'd shown him yesterday. This was a lie, but Amanda didn't know that. I watched the blood drain from her face as she realized that her careful manipulation might have been documented. You're bluffing. Am I? I stood up and smoothed down my skirt. I suppose we'll find out. David should be home soon with Marcus. I think it's time for a family meeting where we discuss your future plans. My future plans? Well, you can't stay here. This is my house, and I'm evicting you. You have 30 days to find somewhere else to live. Amanda's mask slipped completely. You can't do that. David won't let you. David doesn't have a choice. He doesn't own this house. He has no legal standing to prevent me from evicting an unwanted tenant. I'll fight this. I'll take you to court. I'll prove you're mentally incompetent. With what evidence? Fictional emails to a discredited psychiatrist? Testimony from neighbors who were lied to? Bank records that show you committed financial fraud? Amanda stared at me for a long moment, and I could see her mind racing through possibilities, looking for some way to salvage the situation. Finally, she played her last card. If you do this, you'll lose David forever. He'll choose me over you. Will he? Even after he learns that you've been lying to him for months? Even after he realizes that you tried to have his mother institutionalized so you could steal her property? Even after he understands that every concern you expressed about my mental health was fabricated? Amanda had no answer for that. Oh, we both knew that David's trust, once broken, would be nearly impossible to repair. The front door opened, and I heard Marcus's excited voice calling out about the movie they'd seen. David appeared in the doorway, taking in the scene. His wife's pale, stricken face, the documents scattered on the coffee table, my calm presence in his father's old chair. Mom? Amanda? What's going on? I looked at Amanda one final time, giving her a chance to confess, to apologize, to show some genuine remorse for what she'd done. Instead, she turned to David with tears in her eyes and said, "Your mother is trying to throw us out of our home." David looked at me, confusion and pain written across his face. This was the moment of truth, the point where Amanda's carefully constructed lies would either crumble or find new purchase. I smiled at my son and said, "Come sit down, David. Amanda and I have been having a very enlightening conversation about honesty." 6 months later, I stood in the kitchen of my house on Maple Street, watching the morning sun filter through the windows I'd personally chosen, when David was just a young father dreaming of providing his family with a beautiful home. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was finally living in the house I'd bought for someone else. The transformation had been gradual, but complete. Amanda's minimalist decorating had been replaced with warmth, family photos on every surface, Marcus's artwork covering the refrigerator, the comfortable clutter of a home that was actually lived in rather than staged for appearances. "Grandma Eleanor, can you help me with my science project?" Marcus called from the dining room, where he'd spread his materials across the table that had once hosted Amanda's perfectly orchestrated dinner parties. "Of course, sweetheart," I replied, drying my hands on the dish towel. At 9 years old, Marcus had adapted to our new living arrangement with the resilience children possess. He'd asked about Amanda exactly 3 times in the past 6 months, and each time, David had given him an age-appropriate version of the truth. Sometimes adults make choices that mean they can't live together anymore, but that doesn't change how much everyone loves him. The custody arrangement had been surprisingly smooth. Amanda had agreed to every weekend visits and alternating holidays, but she rarely exercised her rights. She'd moved to Phoenix, claiming she needed a fresh start, and her calls to Marcus had dwindled from weekly to monthly to almost nothing. David suspected she'd found a new target for her manipulations, but he'd stopped checking up on her activities months ago. "Dad's picking up pizza for dinner," Marcus announced as I helped him organize his materials for a volcano demonstration. "He said you get to pick the toppings since it's your house." Your house. Marcus had adapted to this reality with matter-of-fact acceptance. To him, It made perfect sense that grandparents owned houses and let their families live with them. Amanda's version of the story, that David had inherited the property, had never made much sense to a child who understood that his grandfather had died long before his father was old enough to own real estate. The divorce had been finalized 3 months ago. Amanda had fought for half of everything, including the house, until David's lawyer had calmly explained that you can't claim ownership of property that was never jointly owned in the first place. She'd walked away with her personal belongings, her car, and a small settlement from David's actual assets, his retirement account and savings. David had struggled with guilt and anger in equal measure. Guilt for not seeing through Amanda's manipulations sooner, anger at himself for allowing his mother to be targeted and abused. I'd spent many evenings talking him through the complex emotions that come with discovering your spouse is not who you thought they were. "I should have known," he'd said one particularly difficult night, sitting at this same kitchen table while Marcus slept upstairs. "I should have questioned her stories about your behavior. I should have spent more time with you myself instead of relying on her reports." "You trusted your wife," I'd replied. "That's what you're supposed to do in a marriage. The fault lies with the person who abused that trust, not with the person who gave it." The hardest part had been rebuilding David's confidence in his own judgment. Amanda's gaslighting had been so thorough that he'd begun questioning his perceptions about everything, not just his mother's mental state. It had taken months of therapy and patient conversation for him to trust his own instincts again. But we'd emerged stronger for it. David and I now had the kind of relationship I'd always hoped for, built on honesty and mutual respect, rather than the polite distance that had characterized our interactions during his marriage. We talked openly about everything from his dating prospects to my own future plans. "Eleanor?" Mrs. Chen's voice called from the front door. "Are you home?" "Coming," I called back, leaving Marcus to his volcano preparations. Mrs. Chen stood on the porch holding a casserole dish and wearing the expression of someone with gossip to share. Over the past 6 months, she'd become one of my closest allies in the neighborhood, bonded by our shared experience of being manipulated by Amanda's lies. "I brought you that tuna noodle casserole you liked," she said, but her eyes were bright with something more important than food. "And I thought you should know. I heard from my cousin in Phoenix." I invited her into the living room, settling into the chair that had become mine by default. "What did your cousin have to say?" Mrs. Chen's smile was sharp with satisfaction. "Amanda's been evicted from her apartment. Apparently, she convinced her landlord that she was a poor, single mother abandoned by her wealthy in-laws, and he let her skip rent for 3 months. When he finally demanded payment, she accused him of age discrimination and tried to have him investigated for harassment. I wasn't surprised. Amanda's pattern of manipulation and victimhood would be hard to break, especially when it had worked so well for so long. There's more," Mrs. Chen continued. "She's been telling people that she's a widow, that her husband died and left her penniless. She's been applying for assistance programs and charity services under false pretenses." "Someone will catch her eventually," I said. "People like Amanda always push too far. My cousin says she's already moved on to a new target, an older man whose wife died last year. She met him at a grief counseling group and told him she was also recently widowed. I felt a pang of sympathy for Amanda's new victim, whoever he was. But I'd learned not to take responsibility for the damage she caused to others. Amanda was an adult who made her own choices, and those choices had consequences that extended far beyond our family." "How do you feel about it?" Mrs. Chen asked, studying my face carefully. It was a question I'd been asking myself for months. How did I feel about Amanda's continued manipulations? About the fact that she'd learned nothing from her experience with our family? About the possibility that she was already working to destroy someone else's life? "I feel sorry for her next victim," I said honestly. "But I feel peace about our situation. She can't hurt us anymore." After Mrs. Chen left, I walked through the house that had become truly mine. In David's old office, I'd set up a reading nook with a comfortable chair and good lighting. The master bedroom had been redecorated with colors I actually liked, rather than Amanda's neutral palette. The guest room was ready for David whenever he needed space to think or wanted to stay over after late nights helping Marcus with homework. It wasn't the retirement I'd planned. At 69, I'd expected to be living quietly in my small apartment, maybe traveling occasionally, enjoying the independence that comes with adult children who no longer need daily parenting. Instead, I was helping raise a 9-year-old while supporting my divorced son through the aftermath of emotional abuse. But it was good, better than good. It was right. Marcus thrived in an environment where he was the center of attention rather than a pawn in adult power games. David was rediscovering who he was without Amanda's constant criticism and manipulation. And I had the family connection I'd been slowly losing before Amanda's threat forced me to fight back. My phone rang as I was preparing ingredients for dinner. David's name on the screen. "Hey, Mom. I'm running late, but I wanted to ask you something." "What's that?" "Marcus wants to have a sleepover party for his birthday next month. Nothing big, maybe 4 or 5 kids. Would that be okay with you?" The question was purely courtesy. David knew I'd never object to anything that made Marcus happy. But I appreciated that he asked, that he treated me as a partner in decisions about the household, rather than assuming he could make plans without consultation. "Of course. We can set up the basement as a party zone so they don't wake us up with their giggling." "Thanks. And Mom, I got some news today. The promotion came through. I'll be making senior partner at the firm." Pride swelled in my chest. David had been working toward this goal for years, but during his marriage to Amanda, his confidence had been so undermined that he'd stopped believing it was possible. "That's wonderful, sweetheart. You've earned it. I couldn't have gotten through this year without you, without this house, without your support during the divorce, without having a stable place for Marcus to live. You would have figured it out," I assured him. "You're stronger than you think, maybe, but I'm grateful I didn't have to find out." After hanging up, I continued my dinner preparations, thinking about gratitude and the unexpected ways life can change direction. A year ago, I'd been slowly fading from my son's life, allowing myself to be marginalized by a woman who saw me as an obstacle to her ambitions. I'd been accepting smaller and smaller roles in my grandson's upbringing, believing that staying quiet and accommodating was the price of family harmony. Amanda's whispered threat at that brunch had been intended to break me, to make me understand my powerlessness and accept my exile gracefully. Instead, it had awakened something I'd forgotten I possessed: the willingness to fight for what mattered to me. The irony was perfect. Amanda had been so focused on getting me out of her house that she'd never bothered to verify that it was actually hers. Her assumption that David owned the property had been the foundation of every plan she'd made, every manipulation she'd orchestrated. When that assumption proved false, her entire strategy had collapsed. But the real victory wasn't in the house or the money or even in Amanda's departure. The real victory was in the relationships that had been strengthened by the crisis. David and I communicated more honestly now than we had in years. Marcus felt secure and loved in a way that wouldn't have been possible in the toxic environment Amanda had been creating. Even my connections with neighbors and community members had been renewed as people learned the truth about Amanda's lies. The front door opened with the sound of Marcus's excited chatter and David's tired but satisfied voice. They'd picked up pizza from our favorite local place, and the smell filled the house with the warmth of family routine. "Grandma Eleanor," Marcus called out. "Dad let me get extra cheese, and we got you those little pepperonis you like." "Perfect," I called back, wiping my hands and joining them in the kitchen. As we sat around the table sharing pizza and listening to Marcus's detailed account of his school day, I thought about Amanda's prediction that this would be my last year in their lives. She'd been right, in a way. It had been the last year of the old version of our family, the version where I existed on the periphery, grateful for whatever scraps of attention I was allowed, careful not to make waves or assert my own needs. That woman was gone, replaced by someone who understood her own worth and wasn't afraid to claim her rightful place in her family's life. Amanda had tried to erase me from their memories, but instead, she'd erased herself. Later that evening, after Marcus had gone to bed and David had settled into the living room with his laptop to catch up on work, I stood on the front porch looking out at the neighborhood I'd helped my son afford, the house across the street where Mrs. Chen lived, The corner where Marcus rode his bike with friends, the maple trees that would turn brilliant red and gold in a few weeks. This was my place. Not because I owned the property, though I did. Not because I paid the bills, though I continued to do that gladly. But because I'd fought for it when it mattered, because I'd refused to be discarded, because I'd chosen to value myself enough to demand better treatment. Amanda's key didn't work anymore, just as I'd promised myself that night 6 months ago. But more importantly, her words didn't work anymore either. The threats and manipulations that had once made me question my worth and my place in my family's life now seemed as powerless as that useless piece of metal she'd tried to turn in a lock that no longer recognized her. I was home, I was loved, I was exactly where I belonged, and no one, not Amanda, not anyone, would ever make me doubt that again.